You are listening to the Novel Writing Podcast, episode 219. I'm your host, Colleen Mitchell. Grab a cup, cozy up, and let's get to writing. Today I'm talking with Cathryn deVries, author of science fantasy novella, Son of Osivirius. Cathryn and her daughter Emmeline are an award-winning writing team based in Australia who write no-spice romantic fantasy and sci-fi. I'm excited to dive into her broad swath of experience in the writing world. So Cathryn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
What is your favorite thing to tell fellow authors about yourself when you meet them in person?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because for a long time I didn't really think of myself as an author. And what I tell them is that I didn't actually mean to start writing at all. I didn't mean to write my first book, which turned out to be a 400,000 word trilogy. It was totally happened by accident.
So how did that happen? By like what's that story?
Well, it started off as my daughter really got into D&D, Emily, my daughter really got into D&D when she was about 14. And so we started playing the normal starter kit. But then she said, I want to write a campaign for our family to play. And she's a really wonderful writer too. So yeah, she got to work writing her own campaign. We created characters for it. My character had like a really big backstory that fed into the campaign as well. And we started playing, and I was having a lot of fun. And it was actually like a really tough time for our family. So this game was like, it was a bright spot in our week. And like I really started enjoying it. We were laughing a lot, doing crazy things. And I decided, just spur of the moment, how about I chronicle our gameplay? Because I didn't want to forget this time. It was such a meaningful time for me, but also one of like such fun and laughter. I just figured at the time, you know, we I can chronicle it. I can print out a couple of copies for us all to just have, and then we can just like laugh at it later. And that's how it started. But as I started writing, like things started happening that were I wasn't expecting. So I started processing like the deep wounds, from earlier in my life and the current pain that like we were sort of going through as a family. And the story started getting bigger than just our family. So it seemed to point to like a universal human experience, the kind of thing that like I love reading about, like that that comes through in so many fantasy novels, that I read growing up, and it started to sound like one of those kind of stories. And so I felt God sort of nudging me to publish, to make this something not just for our family. And I resisted the idea for a very long time. It was like a very scary idea. Like I'm a perfectionist kind of person. I'm not real great with like criticism and things. And I'm just like, I didn't want this story that was so personal to me to be shredded to pieces, like, out in the world. So, but after I had a lot of long prayer walks where I would talk to God about this, like, do you really want me to? Because I don't really want to do this. Like, so yeah, and then eventually I surrendered because it was just pressing too hard. The words were coming out, they were beautiful, and it's just like, okay, well, if this is what you want me to do, then I'm gonna do it properly. So I sort of did because, well, and also because perfectionist me, like, didn't want to be torn to shreds by critics. Um, so it was both. It was both. But yeah, so then I started pursuing it properly because I really felt that other people could be touched by this story in the same way that I was being touched by it. And ultimately, that's what I want to do as an author. Like, I don't want to write just something entertaining. I do actually want to write something meaningful that is going to last, well beyond my lifetime and touch other people's hearts in a yeah, positive, nourishing, life-giving kind of way. Yeah. So that's basically the story of
In a nutshell.
how I accidentally became a writer.
So how long was it between when you started chronicling it and when you finally surrendered to the nudges from God to actually pursue the publishing process?
It's probably about a good 6 months. I think.
That's way shorter than I thought it would be.
Well, I was writing really fast. Like
Okay.
I was I was amazed actually. I've never had such a fast word output, I don't think, since then, because I was at about the 80,000 word mark when I started to think maybe I should do something with this. And I was probably at about the 150,000 word mark, when I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. Like,
And now you're at 400,000.
yes.
And then how long was it between finally surrendering and getting the publishing deal?
Oh, that was much, much longer.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, much, much longer. So I'd been working on I'd been working on the trilogy for probably about 5 years at that point. I finished the first draft. It took me about a year, I think, to finish the first draft, and then I got some feedback from a friend of like, am I insane? Like, is there something worth worth it here, or am I just kidding myself? And she's like, no, 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 there's definitely something worth it there. So and then I went about a whole process of actually refining it, and a couple of on the next round of edits and sending it out to friends, one of them suggested to break it into a trilogy. And I thought, that's a really good idea. It's a lot of work, but a really good idea. So I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
So that took another big chunk of time, and then I got a manuscript assessment, and that's when I started initially querying, but didn't get any bites. So I thought I was going to bite the bullet and actually work with a developmental editor
Hmm.
and book coach, and I did, and that took about another 6 months, I think. Yeah, so that took about another 6 months, and then I started querying in earnest. So at that point, probably about 4.5 years, and then received the offer. I received the offer about 6 months after I began querying.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So during that whole process of writing the book and then querying the book, it sounds like you never thought of yourself as an author during that time or thought of yourself as a writer, which is something that a lot of new writers especially deal with, which is the imposter syndrome, right? And so you were like on this extreme end of I'm not a writer because I didn't mean to write this thing to begin with. So since you had to deal with that extreme, what helped you move through the self-doubt of you're not just like chronicling your family's D&D story, you're actually writing this story that's going to touch people.
Yeah. Well, that was the imposter syndrome came from two angles actually, because I felt like I was riffing off my daughter's ideas, like that I didn't have any ideas of my own, which wasn't true. Yes, so I had the imposter syndrome coming from two angles. One, that I didn't mean to be a writer, and the other one was because I felt like my own creativity well had just dried up, and I was only able to write this because my daughter provided the ideas,
Hmm.
and the backbone for this story, and I was just putting flesh on the bones that she provided, but I really wasn't sure whether I was capable of coming up with my own set of bones for an independent story idea. Um, and so that that made it feel like this was maybe a fluke as well, or like a one-off for a particular purpose. That like that. Okay, maybe God wanted me to write this story, but maybe that's it. Like, maybe I'm done after that. Um, because I don't know if I could know whether I could do it again.
I'm just
Um,
chuckling because as soon as you write one story, the or ideas for other stories just start flooding in. Like every other day, a new story. Okay, pop it into the list.
Yeah, well, I don't know that, yeah, that particular experience wasn't happening for me. I was waiting for it to happen almost. And sometimes I would jot a few things down, but none of them seemed like a complete, it, like, something I could necessarily run with to completion, because I need my end. I need roughly to know what's going to happen at the end, which is kind of weird because I had no idea how this story was going to end, but I knew how the next scene ended because we'd played it. So, like, I was always writing towards the next conclusion. And that's how I write. I need to know what I'm writing towards. So anyway, yeah. So even despite encouragement from my daughters and friends in particular, that yes, I was actually a good writer, and this each draft was getting better every time. Yeah, it was that big picture stuff that was, really bugging me of whether I was, I really didn't know whether I could write another book on purpose by myself, creating the ideas. So I really threw myself into learning storycraft. Uh, that was one of the ways that I helped like combat the imposter syndrome because I actually started learning stuff. So not just relying on this intuition and instinct that I had for story, which thankfully I did have. I'd always loved writing stories all through my childhood and teenage years, and I got good grades at school. So like I knew I could write, but I didn't know what how I was doing it. So studying storycraft was a really important way for me to combat imposter syndrome because I actually started being able to put words around the things that I was doing instinctively, and it to make it more of a process. Not exactly that, but basically I understood objectively what I was doing instinctively, and from that point of knowledge, then being able to refine the instinctive, intuitive stuff, knowing what it was actually meant to accomplish in the story. So, part of all that process of learning storycraft and training my intuition was getting involved. I started off with, I think I just started off simply with 3 act structure. Then I found Save the Cat and went through that a little bit. But I ended up finding the story grid, and that that was a that was probably the biggest thing that shifted my knowledge. So I really deep dove into the story grid method because it really resonated with me and made a lot of sense, and it was doing exactly what I wanted it to do, as in objectively like quantifying the the subjective instinctive stuff. So it was part of a scene writing exercise that I was doing as part of my story grid study when the idea for Son of Osivirius hit me. I was really struggling to, as I said, I don't, I thought my well of ideas are like non-existent, and I had to come up with an idea for this scene writing exercise. And, if I had have had a typewriter instead of a computer, it really would have been a day where I was typing something, ripping out the sheet, tossing, balling it up, tossing it on the floor, 50 million times because I stopped and started this thing so many times. And the annoying thing was I had cleared my decks and set aside like an entire afternoon to bang out this scene. And I was getting absolutely nowhere. And I was getting so frustrated with myself for not being able to come up with a single idea that I could run with for this 800 word scene that I was supposed to write. Like I
Can, can I
so
just like give you props for sticking with it that long when you don't even like have to do it? Because I think most people who go through craft courses or something, like they come across this thing, like, yeah, I don't need to do that exercise. I'll do it later. But you're sitting down for a whole afternoon, like idea after idea, blank page after blank page, and you're just sticking with it. And look, you got a
yeah,
book out of it.
I did. Yeah, and it wasn't until I had given up in frustration for the day, and I was cooking dinner or something, and I suddenly remembered this short story idea that I had jotted down several months before, because the prompt for the scene was 3 characters, all with a different goal, and that's the prompt I had to work to. And this short story idea ran something along the lines of a helicopter pilot in a kind of World War III situation is tasked to fly over this Amish-like group of people because they are refusing to join in the war effort. But he crash lands there, and they look after him. And then when his people come and want to invade, their little place, he has to decide which side he wants to be on. That was my, I thought, yeah, that was like a little short story idea I had. I thought a short story. And then, but when I remembered, it's like, I could so totally use that, like, because it's got, there's a lot of different priorities like happening there for different people. And I can get my three characters with their three different goals. Like, one person who rescues him wants to kill him. The other person wants to help him, and he wants to like carry out his mission. So we've got the three goals, we've got the three people, we've got tension, and then Avatar vibes kind of started speaking to me, and I'm like, yep, there's my scene. And actually, I reckon I could make something more of this too, because I've got the rest of the idea kind of projecting into the future. So, and as I said, I need when I'm writing, I need a point and I need an ending. And I had both of those things. So once the scene was done, I just kept on writing. And I wrote the rest of that draft. I think the first draft took me about 6 weeks. It was really fast. That was only 18,000 words though when it finished. And then the final book is 46,000 words, so it more than doubled in length during the drafting process, which is nice. I like adding rather than subtracting. So that book, this book that is actually turned out to be the first one I released, the fourth one I've written, first one I've released, was really what helped me claim the title author. I'll put it that way. Like, yeah, and it's the I entered it for like quite a number of like indie awards and stuff, and it picked up just about everyone I entered. So that definitely helps with the with the validation too. I was like, yes, I do actually know what I'm doing. Other people who don't know me also think this.
A little bit of a
Um,
motivation boost.
yes, yes, yes.
So because you need to have an end in mind when you write, is that what a reverse outline is? What's a reverse outline?
No, it's basically outlining after you've written the story. I'd heard this idea somewhere along the line, I don't know. And I because I started doing it firstly out of necessity because I hadn't planned this story to begin with at all. So at first it was simply, okay, well, if I want to improve this story, I need to have a structure for it. So it started off as trying to impose structure on this unstructured thing. And I'm not a planner anyway, so I don't think I've even through school, I don't think I ever planned a single essay or story. I managed to get A's for them somehow. Never planned. I just wrote. So this kind of reverse outlining method suits me perfectly because it's what I just do naturally. Yeah. So I wanted to find out if this completely unplanned story worked as a story. And I had heard about reverse outlining, which is outlining after you've written the story. And I actually found it a great tool. So you see and it can work for people who have planned their stories too, because the aim of it is to see what you have actually written, not what you think you've written, which can be two different things. So it allows you to zoom out and find the big picture and the true theme and see where the story beats lie in reality, which may or may not align with your original plan for the story if you were a planner. You can see connections and disconnections between the beats and like diagnose any pacing issues. So I think it's a really useful tool for any author, even if you've pre-planned it, to then go back and like basically I start off with a scene list, and like so I just write down a rough outline of what happens in each scene, and then I take this. Well, now I use story grid structure, and I divide it firstly into quadrants, and then actually no, that all sounds far too linear and logical, and it does not happen like that. So, yeah, I kind of look
It's
at the
all
story.
messy.
Yes, it is. It is. So I do start off with a rough scene list, I think, but then the scene list gets refined as the last step in the process because that becomes then my master revision document. So I look at global stuff first, the story as a whole. I try and pick out the inciting incident, the turning point, the the crisis area of the book where the character has to make their critical decision, and then the climax, and then the resolution, and then I gradually gets more granular as we go along. So then I divide it into four acts. So there's a beginning hook act, a middle build up, which builds up to the midpoint, then what's called a middle breakdown, which is where things start unraveling for the character, to their crisis moment, which is also often referred to as the all is lost, and then the ending payoff where the climax happens and we get our big cathartic release. And each of those acts also has an inciting incident, a turning point, a crisis, a climax, and a resolution. So that's why I love the story grid structure, because it's fractal. It's all the same structure from global right down to beat, if you want to take it that far. And it works very well with my mind and how and my instinct and intuition about how stories work. So then, after that, then that's at that when I've got it to that quadrant breakdown, that's when I really start analyzing, because that's when I can sort of see if there are areas where there is too many scenes happening, or there's not enough, or things are too squished. Like that's what happened with Son of Osirius. The ending payoff was very squished. The the all the important moments were happening too quickly. They were all jammed into the one scene. And so that's how I knew that there's something not right there. I need to spread that out. And it just various things like that. And that all happens, at a high level. And so then I can actually go in and refine the scene list. It's like, okay, well, I need a scene that does this, and I need a scene that does that. And that then working again with my book coach and editor, we got that we got that sorted. And then yeah, so that's kind of how reverse outlining works. So you take what you've written, and you zoom out to see what's really there, and what you might either need to condense or expand, and or or if you've missed out like an important moment completely, you can see all sorts of things from
So it
it.
sounds like it's a really good revision tool,
Mm,
editing tool, not necessarily like I'm using this to plan my book before I start because you do it after you write the whole book. But yeah,
yeah.
I tend to write with the KM Weiland four act. It's not four, it's like the four-part structure because that's what works with my brain. But I usually stop right at the halfway point, and then I go back and I fix everything that's wrong with the first half so that the second half flows better. And I use a plot grid for that. I don't know if that's story grid or not, but it's very helpful to zoom out and see, well, what did you write? Does that actually work or not? And do you need to cut scenes?
Yep, yep. Sounds like a similar kind of thing. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think you can. I think you could use this with whichever method
Yeah.
works best for you.
Yep. Yep. And that's what matters is that if it works for you, it works for you. And if it doesn't, find something that does.
That's exactly.
So when you said this prompt for this scene was three characters with different goals, how does that tie into what you're calling two halves of a character's goal? Is that where you figured this out, or did that come later?
Um, it's all messy where it all came in, but it is actually something that Sean Grid at Story Grid has codified as a just a really simple tool for looking at a character's goal. So that's where I got it from. But basically, all characters who have an arc, they want something which we'll call X, but they also want to avoid something which we'll call Y. And most authors know about that characters want something, and that they have a goal, and that they're moving towards a goal. But a lot of authors don't consciously realize, or don't realize at all, that that same character is also wanting to avoid something just as much as they want to get this other thing. So they want to get their X without having to do Y. And that is what drives the tension and the growth arc for the story. And if you don't have that thing that they are avoiding, you don't have stakes. And so a lot of authors, so that's why I think of this, if you only know what they want, I think of it as like the goal is half baked. And like what happens to a cake if you take it out of the oven half baked?
It's not edible.
No,
And it sags.
it
Sags.
falls in the middle.
Yeah.
And I really think that is the origin of what a lot of authors call the saggy middle. And so, but if your goal is fully baked, you won't get that saggy middle. The middle is exciting. The middle is actually like when the character starts to realize that they might not be able to get what they want without doing this other thing that they don't want to do. And that's what readers that's subconsciously realize. It can be extraordinarily difficult to pin down what this thing that they're avoiding is. But we as readers we feel it. Like we know that's where the tension and the stakes that's why there are tension and stakes because we are watching this character struggling to get this goal and also struggling not to do that thing that will be a death for them. Like that's if they have to do this thing that they don't want to get their goal, it feels like an internal death. So this what they're trying to avoid is related to their internal need, but it's not precisely the same thing because what they want to avoid is an actual tangible thing,
Mm.
as tangible as the thing that they want. And they and but because they're trying to avoid it, that's why it can be hard to pin down because it's not it's kind of subtly or invisibly on the page rather than overt like the goal that they're pursuing.
Yeah.
So that's why it can be really hard to nail down. But once you know it, it it feels right. Yeah. But
Okay.
they all have this they all have this like if they don't, then they're a villain, basically. Because
Oh,
a villain will a villain wants to get what they want at any cost. Like
they're willing to do anything.
they're
Yeah.
willing to pay any price. A protagonist is not willing to pay any price. There is a price that they are trying to avoid paying. Um, so the story is all about pushing them and seeing what is it going to take for the character to pay that price to get what they want. And that makes for a really exciting story.
I'm
So
grinning over here because as you were talking, I was trying to figure out, okay, so what is this thing that my villain in my villain backstory, or the protagonist in my villain backstory, who is the main character and the villain in the main series, like what is she trying to avoid? And then you said if they don't have anything that they want to avoid, then they're the villain. I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. She doesn't have anything that she's trying to avoid.
well, yes, that does make perfect. It's good that it kind of validates your own experience of,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, yeah. So if like probably some examples of this, like in that hopefully people will know, like in Pride and Prejudice, Lizzie Bennet, she wants to marry for love, um, and but she doesn't want to have to admit that she was wrong. That's the thing she's trying to avoid. And once you sort of see it, it's like, oh yeah, of course. But she has to admit that she was wrong to be able to marry for love. Otherwise, it's not going to happen for her. So that's what that book's about. In the Shawshank Redemption, Andy Dufresne, he wants to get out of prison, but he wants to do it without breaking the law and without breaking his frame of reference that the justice system is just and provides justice. And it's not until he can accept that no, the justice system is not going to give him justice that he can get the thing that he wants. And in the Hunger Games, Katniss wants to win without making alliances. And so the book is pushing her towards having to make this alliance with Peter. And I'm pretty sure I haven't like analyzed the book or anything, but I'm pretty sure at the midpoint of the first book of the Hunger Games is about when Peter has his interview with Caesar and drops the bombshell that he's in love with Katniss, and like that is a pretty, if it is the midpoint, like that's a pretty powerful midpoint because that then really catalyzes Katniss's like this avoiding thing. You know, she's really faced with the possibility that she is going to have to form an alliance with Peter in order to win the games because the audience is expecting it. So, and then as it goes along, like, you know, she does form an alliance with Rue. That's her first alliance, and you know, and when then we, you know, we get to the critical moment, and you know, it's got to be either they both win or they both lose.
That handful of berries. No.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, it can be really, as I said, it can be really hard to nail down. But once you've nailed it down, it, like for me, I feel it in my body of, "Ah, yes,
Yeah.
that's what it is."
Yeah. One of the other things that you mentioned in the email that we had before was that you write theme first without it coming across as preachy. And I think there's a lot of advice out there of you have to know what your theme is before you start writing, but you also don't want to be throwing it in people's faces. So how do you manage to write theme first without throwing it in people's faces?
I think what happens is I let the events of the story do the work. So everything is based around the theme. Like the the plot events come out of the theme. The characters' particular wants and needs are directly related to the theme, and the world itself showcases the theme. So I don't need to do a lot of overt one character telling the other character how it is, and what they need to know, because the character is learning the learning the theme themselves quite naturally through the story. That's what I try and do anyway. So, and this is where the reverse outlining process is really helpful, because if I know what my theme is, and I don't necessarily have a totally clarified theme before I start writing. I know my rough point of what I'm trying to do through the story, but in the when I've got the story down, that's when I really start drilling in and trying to really define this theme. And it's all based around a central problem that the characters are working through of, you know, when is it the right time to do this and when is it the right time to do that. So it's all context driven. So the context that the character finds themselves in, where the the right answer to their problem is to do what the theme is. They discover that naturally through the plot events, the problems that they come across, the solutions that don't work, and versus the solution that does work. And then yeah, that's how I think of, you know, writing this theme first, but I don't need to preach because the story does the work. Yeah.
So does that conflict with Save the Cat, where I know there's a specific section in Save the Cat where you're supposed to have like the thematic statement is made? And like if you're saying that theme first without being preachy means you don't make that thematic statement, do you still have a moment in the beginning where it's kind of obvious that this is the thing that the character needs to learn?
No, it's not that we never it's not that we never say things, it's that it's subtle. So I do put a theme, I do make sure that there is like a thematic thing happening in that early section of I can't remember exactly what percentage it's supposed to happen, but yeah, I will make sure that something very that foreshadows the theme, hints at the theme, like, and is very much tied to the theme, is happening in that section of the book where there's a statement of theme, but it's not necessarily one character saying to the other, you know, you need to do this. Um, like, but it's them kind of it's the theme pressing on the character for the first time. That's how I think of it. And I usually do some tweaks around that section to make sure that we get a sense of what the solution to the problem is going to turn out to be. So it's all very intentionally crafted. It's around that moment. It's not, but it's just not necessarily overt.
Okay. So, since you have your trilogy being published with a traditional publisher, hopefully the next year, and
Mhm.
you have your wonderful debut novella already out, what are you working on right now?
I'm actually really laser focused on the second book of the trilogy, getting that into shape because the first book is done. It's with the publisher, but the second book hadn't had the same level of work as my first book went through. So I'm working with my developmental editor on it now, rewriting it, making sure it's all properly working as a book. Yeah.
Tip top shape. All right. So, if
Okay.
listeners would like to connect with you or buy a copy of Son of Osivirius, where is the best place to do that online?
The best place is to head to my website, which you can get to via either eclectaperennial.com or my author name, catherinedeVries.com. They both point to the same place. And I've got lots of different buying options there, all the major retailers, Amazon. But on that website, you can also buy direct from me, and it's the only place you'll get the illustrated version. I'd go there, and then you can feel free to go wherever you like after that, whichever retailer. But also, while you're there, to connect with me, I'd love readers to sign up for my newsletter because then I will send them a non-spoiler epilogue to
Ooh,
the romantic fantasy trilogy. So that's Lightning Hunter, and you'll get to meet one of the characters who was played by my younger daughter, and get an introduction to this world, before the trilogy comes out, but in a completely non-spoiler way.
that
Um,
sounds awesome.
yeah,
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you for coming on the show. It's been really great talking with you.
no worries. It's been a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. All right, everybody. That is it for today's episode. Thanks for joining us. And remember, the first draft is supposed to be garbage. The Novel Writing Podcast is a production of Colleen Mitchell Writes. For more writing resources, including Curios, Tally Inc. author services, and the 60-day novel writing challenge, check out the links in the description.